Alexander fired a searing laser blast through the alien's skull as it attempted to board his ship, causing green blood to splatter across the cockpit window. His expression remained unflinching, even as brain matter scattered over his face. Instead of reacting to the grisly scene, he focused on the flashing alerts on every screen. Hull breach in the cargo bay, port nell leaking plasma, shields failing, and weapons overheating. Typical Tuesday, he muttered. He pushed the corpse, now slumped over the control panel, aside with a grunt. Gripping the joystick, Alexander forcefully rolled his battered freighter to port, narrowly evading a plasma torpedo that streaked by, almost clipping the forward wing. Glancing at the forward cameras, he caught a glimpse of the pursuing Klingon warbird, its hull adorned with menacing spikes and blades designed to intimidate prey. But Alexander was no easy prey. Another oversized scrap heap flown by psychos who eat live worms, he growled, flipping switches to redirect power from failing shields to the engines. The old boat shuddered as he pushed the reactor to its limits, hurtling towards the volcanic moon ahead. The Klingon were relentless, unwilling to let a notorious human mercenary slip away, especially one carrying stolen intel worth a fortune. They hunted him for his head, just like the Romulans did after a smuggling job gone wrong with banned plasma rifles, and the Fangi hit squad still seething over those forged latinum bars. Alexander had a price on his head in half the systems of the quadrant, but that was all part of the job, his job. Nothing else mattered to him now. Not the Navy where he'd once served with distinction, nor the family who had turned their backs on him when he needed them the most. The next contract, the next payload, the next narrow escape, that was his life. All he had left. Suddenly, a violent impact jolted Alexander against his restraints. The Klingon had closed the distance. Alarms blared as the weakened shields collapsed, and shrapnel tore through the hull. The volcanic moon loomed just 30 seconds away at full burn. He was a sitting duck. Alexander didn't pray. He'd seen too much to believe in God's listening. But as the crippled freighter plunged into the roiling clouds of the volcanic moon, groaning under the strain, he found himself hoping that this old boat had one last miracle left in her. A loud bang reverberated through the ship as the port wing clipped an outcropping, sending the vessel into a wild spin. Thick black smoke poured from the fractured hull, obscuring Alexander's view. Fighting against the planet's gravitational pull, the wounded craft struggled like prey dragged into a predator's jaws. Hull integrity was down to 20%, reactor containment failing, but Alexander ignored the dire warnings flashing across the ship's computer. His eyes were fixed on the sensor screen, where a faint signal cut through the interference. KNX diving after him, disruptors glowing in readiness to finish him off. A feral grin spread across Alexander's face. "Not yet, you scaly," he muttered, slapping the emergency power override to divert everything to the maneuvering thrusters. The ship bucked like a wild bronco as he wrestled with the controls, attempting to pull out of the dive. Metal shrieked in protest, rivets popping like gunshots. A burst of disruptor fire traced molten holes along the freighter's flank, filling the cockpit with the acrid stench of burning metal. Alexander choked on the fumes, eyes watering. KNX's warship emerged from the swirling clouds, afterburners flaring as she bore down on him, weapons poised to surgically dismantle his ship. The freighter lurched and staggered, starboard thrusters sputtering under the onslaught. Glancing at the forward view screen, Alexander caught sight of KNX's fierce grin, relishing her impending kill. His jaw clenched in frustration as he pounded a fist on the sparking control panel. Shields were gone, weapons offline, engines failing. He was a sitting duck. Then, inspiration struck like lightning. Alexander's fingers flew over the controls, emergency rerouting power to the forward deflector. It was a desperate gamble, a suicide move, but what choice did he have? Jaw set, he angled the freighter's nose down, diving deeper into the gas giant's churning storm bands. Visibility dropped to zero as searing clouds engulfed the ship, lightning dancing across the hull, the stench of ozone mixing with scorched insulation. KNX relentlessly pursued, her senses faltering in the electromagnetic maelstrom. She narrowed her yellow eyes, fingers tightening around the weapon triggers as she fought to reacquire her target. Alexander clenched his teeth, eyes fixed on the swirling maelstrom ahead. The sensor readings flickered wildly as he pushed the ship's engines beyond their limits. With a sharp maneuver, he cut power, causing the freighter to spin violently. Gripping the controls, he reversed thrust, aligning his ship's nose with the looming warship. Nox, aboard her heavily damaged vessel, widened her eyes in surprise as Alexander's freighter suddenly turned to face her. Reacting instinctively, she fired. But the ion storm scattered her shots harmlessly past Alexander's ship. A wolfish grin spread across Alexander's lips as he activated the deflector controls. A blinding flare erupted from the freighter's bow, releasing a massive shockwave into the turbulent clouds. The blast struck Nox's ship like a hammer, causing bulkheads to buckle and control panels to explode in showers of sparks. The warship veered off, trailing smoke and debris, its stabilizers shattered by the localized blast. Inside her cockpit, Nox was greeted by shrieking warnings as her crippled ship plunged deeper into the planet's gravitational well. Consoles burst into flames around her as she desperately fought for control, refusing to accept defeat even as the swirling storm threatened to swallow her ship whole. Nox's vessel continued to careen through the churning clouds like a wounded beast nearing its end, its hull groaning under the planet's crushing grip. She hammered the emergency beacon, sending a distress call into the void, a desperate plea for salvation. Meanwhile, aboard his own damaged ship, Alexander watched power levels plummet, his face bathed in the angry crimson glow of warning lights. He knew he had only minutes, perhaps less, before the maelstrom consumed his ship. His eyes flicked to the navigation screen, plotting a course to breach the atmosphere towards the rendezvous coordinates. The success of his mission, his payment, and his own survival all hung in the balance. His fingers moved swiftly over the controls, diverting the last dregs of power to the thrusters. The ship shuddered as the engines roared to life, straining against the abyss. Yet, amidst his preparations to flee, Alexander's gaze fell upon the bioscanner displaying Nox's fading life signs. The Klingon's heartbeat stuttering, brainwaves erratic as the planet's fury crushed her life away. A familiar coldness settled over Alexander. A pragmatism that had kept him alive, made him the best. Leave Nox to her fate, complete the mission, survive. But as he watched Nox's vital signs dimming, something stirred within him. A flicker of empathy, a kinship he couldn't name. It stayed his hand. "God damn it," he snarled, gripping the yoke as his ship banked sharply, diving after Nox into the heart of the storm. A suicidal plunge. Lightning danced across his hull as he wrestled with the controls, pushing his ship to its breaking point. Through the haze of static, he spotted Nox's ship tumbling through the clouds. Gritting his teeth, he maneuvered alongside her, the two vessels spinning in a deadly embrace. With a reverberating clang, the docking clamps engaged, locking them together. Nox's eyes fluttered open in disbelief, a glimmer of respect crossing her features as she saw Alexander's ship tethered to hers. There was no time for words. Alexander diverted everything to the strained engines, heaving back on the controls. The joined ships climbed brutally, their hulls screaming under the planet's gravitational pull like a vengeful god. Coolant sprayed from ruptured lines, alarms blared, and the ships seemed on the verge of tearing apart. Yet, Alexander pushed them higher, pouring every ounce of energy into one final, desperate push. With a bone-jarring wrench, they broke free, escaping the gas giant's grasp and emerging into the star-flecked void. The two ships, now locked in a graceless tangle, spun lazily in the silence of space. Behind them trailed vented atmosphere and debris, a glittering wake against the infinite cosmos. Alexander sat back in his seat in the cockpit, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. His hands trembled as he relinquished control of the spacecraft. With a hiss, the airlock opened, releasing a sudden rush of escaping atmosphere that tousled Alexander's sweat-soaked hair. Drifting forward in the weightlessness of the ruined ship, he moved with an eerie grace. Debris floated past, shattered panels, ruptured conduits, and globules of coolant shimmering in the dim emergency lighting. From the opposite side of the airlock emerged Nox. Her yellow eyes glinted in the gloom, her usual severe warriors not undone, letting her black hair frame her angular face. Dark blood from a gash on her forehead formed crimson spheres around her as she glared at Alexander. Despite her battered state, they faced each other amidst the wreckage they had caused. Alexander's hand rested on his plasma blade, steady and poised, while Nox's fingers twitched towards her dagger at her hip. The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of leaking air and the faint crackle of damaged systems. The ships groaned around them with a low, metallic keening that set their teeth on edge. Finally, Nox broke the tension, her voice rough with gravelly intensity. "Why did you save me, human? You could have left me to die." Her words carried an undertone of accusation, as if Alexander's actions were a slight against her honor. Alexander met her gaze without flinching, his jaw clenched. "Don't read too much into it," he replied curtly. "I need information, and you're more valuable to me alive than dead." His words were devoid of sentiment, matter of fact. Nox bristled visibly, her grip tightening on her dagger. "I am a warrior of the Klingon Empire," she snarled, pride and fury mixing in her voice. "I will never betray my people, no matter what you do to me." Her eyes flashed defiance, challenging him to challenge her. Alexander snorted derisively. "I don't need your secrets," he retorted, his lip curling. "I need your help." He gestured to the surrounding devastation, the twisted metal and sparking wires. "Both our ships are badly damaged. We're stranded out here, light years from any inhabited system. If we don't work together, we'll both die." His voice remained flat, pragmatic, stating simple facts. Nox eyed him warily, suspicion etched in every line of her face. She was torn between her ingrained distrust of humans and the undeniable logic of his words. The ships shuddered around them, underscoring the precariousness of their situation. Grudgingly, she nodded, her movement tight and controlled. "What do you propose?" Her words were strained, as if forced from her throat. "A temporary truce," Alexander replied, his expression unreadable. "We pool our resources, repair what we can, and limp to the nearest neutral port. Once there, we go our separate ways and never speak of this again." His tone was cold, businesslike, more transactional than collaborative. Nox hesitated, pride battling pragmatism behind her eyes. Her grip on her dagger tightened, knuckles white against the dark metal. Slowly, she extended her hand, bridging the gap between them. "Agreed," she said, the words sounding as if it were wrenched from her core. "But if you betray me, human, I will hunt you to the ends of the galaxy." Her voice was low, deadly serious, a promise rather than a threat. Alexander reached out, clasping her forearm in a warrior's grip. Their eyes met, a hint of grudging respect glinting in the depths. "Likewise, Klingon," he said, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "Now, let's get to work." With his hands still on his plasma blade, he pushed off towards the heart of the ship. Nox followed closely behind. In the days that followed, they worked side by side, repairing the extensive damage to their ships. They salvaged what they could from Nox's vessel, using its parts to restore basic functionality to Alexander's ship. It was grueling work, hours spent in cramped Jeffries tubes and scorched engine rooms, the air thick with the acrid stench of burnt circuitry and spilled coolant. They spoke little as they labored, communicating in terse sentences and pointed gestures. Yet even in their silences, a grudging respect grew. Alexander couldn't help but admire Nox's fierce determination, the way she never complained or slacked, even when exhaustion weighed heavily on her limbs and spirit as she observed Alexander, deftly fashioning a power coupling from nothing more than salvaged metal scraps. Through sheer determination, she began to grasp why he held the reputation of a survivor. As days blurred into weeks, their meager rations dwindled, settling them into a tense routine of trading barbs and challenges while striving to outperform each other. Yet, during their nightly reprieves over modest meals of protein bars and recycled water, their conversations took a different turn. "Why do you do it?" KNX asked one evening, her eyes catching the faint glimmer of galley light. "Why risk your life for credits and cargo?" Alexander fell silent, staring into his battered mug before his distant voice broke the quiet. "I used to believe in something," he admitted softly. "The Federation, my crew, my family, they all let me down. Now, all I have left is the job. It's the only thing that hasn't betrayed me." Nodding slowly, KNX responded, "For me, it's duty, honor. My life belongs to the Empire, to my house. Every battle, every scar, is a testament to my loyalty." Tracing a finger along a jagged ridge of scar tissue on her forearm, she spoke with a distant look in her eyes. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a recognition of the pain they both bore. They were warriors, survivors, bound by a code few could comprehend. In that shared understanding, a fragile bond began to form. Weeks stretched into months as they battled to revive their ship, working in grim silence, each small victory hard-won yet significant. The day they finally restored power to the engines and felt the ship hum back to life around them, they allowed themselves a brief moment of triumph. Alexander's rare grin split his face as he let out a whoop of joy. KNX couldn't suppress her fierce smile, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction. But as they prepared to depart, plotting a course for the nearest neutral port, an unexpected tension filled the air. Alexander, his hand hovering over the navigation controls, turned to KNX with an unusual hesitation in his eyes. "Come with me," he urged gruffly, almost uncertain. "Leave the Empire behind. We make a good team, you and I. Think of what we could accomplish together." Stunned, KNX hesitated, a sudden yearning stirring within her. For a fleeting moment, she envisioned a life free from duty, from the relentless call of war. A life where choices were her own, where she could forge her own destiny. But just as quickly as the thought surfaced, she pushed it away, a pang of sorrow piercing her heart. "I cannot," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "My place is with my people, my honor. I am Klingon, and always will be." Understanding flickered in Alexander's eyes as he nodded, his expression hardening. A shudder fell over his gaze. "I understand, but if you ever change your mind, you know how to find me." He turned back to the controls, his shoulders tense, jaw clenched. Watching him, KNX felt an unwelcome wetness sting her eyes. Angrily, she blinked it away, cursing the weakness of sentiment. Deep down, she knew that the next time they met, it would likely be as enemies, their fleeting alliance forgotten amidst the heat of battle. As Alexander's ship pulled away, the airlock sealing with a final hiss, KNX couldn't help but wonder what might have been had she been brave enough to choose a different path. With a heavy heart, she turned back to her own vessel, preparing for the long, lonely journey back to Kyonos, the weight of her choices bearing down on her like the crushing depths of space.